Friends, if you want to enjoy a fun-filled animated adventure with laughs, aliens, and heartwarming moments, then you should definitely watch the super entertaining movie Home, 2015 in English. And if you're visiting our channel for the very first time, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. In today's video, we're going to talk about this exciting family film called Home. We'll explore what this movie is all about, where you can watch it, and all the amazing facts that make it a must-watch. I'll be giving you full information on which OTT platform or satellite channel you can catch this film on. Not just that, we'll also dive into the movie's technical details, including animation, music, pre-production, and post-production, as well as the budget and box office performance. We're also going to break down the storyline, share a mini review of the film's plot, and talk about the voice cast, their performances, and which characters they bring to life. So, I request all of you to stay with us till the very end of the video, because this is going to be a fun ride into the world of Home. Let's get started. Plot and narrative. The story of Home kicks off with a lively invasion, but not the kind you're used to. The Boov, a quirky and cowardly alien race, arrive on Earth to escape their mortal enemies, the Gorg. In their mind, they're doing humanity a favor by relocating everyone to a controlled settlement and taking over the planet. Among these Boov is O, an enthusiastic but socially awkward outcast who just wants to make friends and fit in. Unfortunately, his attempts usually end in disaster. Early on, he makes a huge mistake by accidentally sending out a galaxy-wide invite to his housewarming party, which could alert the Gorg to their location. Now he's suddenly public enemy number one among his own kind. Meanwhile, we meet Tip, a smart and determined human girl who's been separated from her mother during the relocation. She's one of the few humans left uncaptured. When O and Tip cross paths, it's a classic opposites at first sight scenario. Tip wants nothing to do with O, and O would rather hide in a corner than deal with confrontation. But through a hilarious and heartfelt series of events, the two form an unlikely friendship and embark on a cross-country adventure to reunite Tip with her mom and stop the Gorg from finding Earth. The story unfolds in a fairly linear structure, but it's packed with surprises. Every stage of their journey tests their trust, communication, and willingness to grow. From driving a slushy-fueled flying car to sneaking into Boov headquarters, each moment pushes the characters to evolve. One of the film's emotional highs comes when O finally realizes the meaning of family, courage, and self-sacrifice, not in the Boov way of running away, but by standing up for the ones he cares about. Tip, in turn, learns that sometimes even the strangest beings can be the truest friends. What makes the narrative special is how it mixes comedy, emotion, and action without ever losing its heart. While the story may follow a conventional arc, it's elevated by the charming dynamic between O and Tip, the vibrant animation, and the universal themes of belonging, bravery, and acceptance. It's a road trip story at its core, but with flying cars, space conflicts, and interspecies friendship, the journey is anything but ordinary. Let's talk about the characters of Home, 2015, because this is where things get surprisingly heartfelt and delightfully weird. At first glance, you think it's just another animated alien meets girl adventure. But stick with it, and you'll realize the characters go through transformations that are both emotional and comedic gold. Let's start with O. Yes, his name is literally O, because every time he shows up, other Boov go, oh, in disappointment. That pretty much sums up his social status at the start of the movie. He's the ultimate outcast, cheerfully clueless, hopelessly awkward, and painfully eager to be liked. He's the Boov that doesn't fit the Boov mold. And that mold is all about logic, order, and avoiding danger at all costs. So when O tries to throw a party or make small talk, he's seen as a walking disaster. But that's the charm. He starts off isolated and painfully insecure, but through his journey with Tip, we see his emotional vocabulary explode. He learns guilt, friendship, fear, and ultimately, courage. His development isn't just surface-level be braver stuff. It's about learning to care for someone more than himself, which is wildly un-Boov. Watching O evolve from a lonely misfit to a self-sacrificing friend who challenges his entire species' way of life is surprisingly powerful. Then there's gratuity, Tip Tucci. She's not your typical animated movie kid. For one, she's one of the very few Afro-Caribbean girl protagonists in a mainstream animated film. She's also incredibly determined, fiercely independent, and emotionally grounded. When we meet her, she's just a child separated from her mother after the Boov invasion, but she doesn't crumble. She becomes a one-girl resistance force, navigating a world flipped upside down while caring for her cat Pig and building a homemade tech mobile. Tip's arc isn't about becoming strong. She already is. It's about learning to trust again. Especially trusting someone like O, a member of the species responsible for her pain. Her emotional wall is high and justified. But watching it slowly come down as she sees O's genuine remorse and awkward empathy is deeply satisfying. The film never rushes her forgiveness, which gives her growth real weight. What really drives both characters forward is their dynamic. Tip and O are polar opposites. She's driven by emotion and intuition, while he's governed by rules and fear. But their clash is where the story finds its heartbeat. Their road trip isn't just a literal journey across the globe, it's the space where they unravel each other. Tip teaches O about rhythm, family, and what it means to feel. O teaches Tip that not all aliens are the same, and sometimes even the most annoying ones have the biggest hearts. Their bond evolves from forced allies to best friends in a way that feels earned, with each challenge deepening their trust. Every argument, every misunderstanding, every goofy dance moment adds another layer. Captain Smek, on the other hand, is less about development and more about satirical contrast. He represents the unbending, arrogant ideology of the Boov. He's the fool who thinks he's a genius, clinging to his bubble-wrap scepter of authority like it's Excalibur. But even his exaggerated cowardice serves a purpose. It highlights how radical and brave O's transformation really is. While Smek refuses to learn, O leans into the terrifying unknown of emotion and empathy, which makes his arc all the more rewarding. Even the supporting characters, like Pig the cat, play small but significant roles. Pig acts as an emotional compass for Tip, a nonverbal symbol of comfort and connection. And Kyle, the Boov supervisor, goes from indifferent drone to reluctant supporter, showing that even the background characters shift slightly as O's actions ripple through the Boov society. In the end, Home doesn't just give us a friendship story. It gives us a mirror for empathy. Every character, especially O and Tip, has to step out of their own comfort zone, confront their biases, and let themselves be vulnerable. And for a candy-colored alien invasion comedy, that's pretty profound. Let's talk about the voices behind Home, 2015, because this movie isn't just about aliens and bubble-powered cars. It's about how voices transform those animated faces into living, breathing, emotionally complex beings. The cast doesn't just read lines. They become the characters. They sell the weird, the funny, the heartfelt, and everything in between. First up is Jim Parsons as O, and let's be real, this casting was a stroke of genius. Parsons takes that signature neurotic, overly literal delivery he made famous elsewhere and cranks it up to intergalactic levels. O is awkward, earnest, and endlessly lovable, and that's almost entirely due to Parsons' delivery. His voice has this bouncing, staccato rhythm that makes O sound like he's constantly trying to translate alien syntax into Earth feelings. It's not just funny, it's layered. Parsons brings a sense of loneliness into O's misguided optimism, and his comedic timing adds a layer of charm that keeps O from becoming irritating. When O is terrified, you feel his fear in your bones. When he's gleefully discovering music or friendship, you can hear the joy spilling out. There's an innocence in his voice that's hard to fake, and it makes his emotional journey hit much harder than you'd expect from a gelatinous purple alien. Then there's Rihanna as Tip, and this is where things get interesting. She's not just the voice actor. She also brought the soundtrack, infusing the film with her musical energy. But her voice work? Surprisingly strong. Rihanna doesn't go over the top or cartoonish. She plays Tip with a grounded, real-world teenage tone that stands in sharp contrast to O's exaggerated speech. That balance works beautifully. Her performance gives Tip an edge of sarcasm and frustration, but it's layered with warmth and vulnerability. When Tip talks about missing her mom or struggles with trusting O, Rihanna delivers it with subtle emotional control that makes Tip feel like a real kid dealing with something way bigger than herself. There's a raw honesty to the way she speaks that brings authenticity to a role that could have easily been flattened into just the spunky sidekick. Steve Martin steps in as Captain Smek, and he is in full-on ridiculous mode. This is vintage Martin. Absurd, theatrical, and gleefully self-absorbed. Smek is basically a walking ego wrapped in bubble wrap, and Martin milks every single syllable for comedic gold. He doesn't just speak lines. He performs them like he's doing a one-man show for an audience of himself. His booming, overconfident delivery contrasts perfectly with the nervous, bumbling tone of O, and the result is this grand parody of leadership that plays out like a satire of every bad boss you've ever had. Martin's vocal energy keeps Smek teetering on the edge of hilarious and pathetic, which is exactly what the character needs. And don't sleep on Matt Jones as Kyle. He's not in the spotlight much, but his voice brings that dry, weary sarcasm that adds a needed layer of deadpan to the Boov hierarchy. Jones nails the role of the reluctant coworker who just wants to be left out of whatever weird thing O is doing this time. His few scenes hit because he doesn't try to be overly animated. He lets the understated tone do the heavy lifting, which makes his eventual softening feel earned. Together, this voice cast elevates home from standard animated fare to something much more charming and heartfelt. It's the blend of contrast that makes it sing, O's hyperformal weirdness bouncing off Tip's grounded emotion, Smek's chaos running parallel to Kyle's monotony. The chemistry works not because they're in the same lane, but because they're all driving wildly different cars and somehow manage to stay on the same road. This isn't a film that relies on visuals alone. It thrives on sound, on tone, on the subtle tremble in a sentence or the loud exaggeration of a boast. And that's all thanks to performances that turn a goofy alien story into something emotionally resonant. Tim Johnson, the director of Home, 2015, takes what could have been a generic alien meets human tale and spins it into a quirky, vibrant, and emotionally charged roller coaster. He doesn't just tell a story, he curates a mood. From the opening scene, it's clear Johnson isn't aiming for high-stakes sci-fi thrills or a gritty alien invasion. He's aiming for warmth, whimsy, and heart, and he delivers it with a style that's as colorful as it is confident. The tone of Home walks a tightrope between slapstick comedy and emotional sincerity, and that balancing act is all thanks to Johnson's direction. He understands the humor in miscommunication, especially when it comes from an alien trying to speak in slightly broken grammar and odd metaphors. But he also knows exactly when to pull the rug out and let silence or subtle emotion take over. One moment you're watching, O hilariously misunderstand how doors work, and the next, you're caught off guard by Tip's quiet heartbreak over being separated from her mother. The tonal shift doesn't feel jarring. It feels organic, like Johnson's inviting the audience to laugh with the characters before asking them to feel something real. Visually, Johnson leans into a candy-colored aesthetic that reflects the emotional undercurrent of the story. The Boov design isn't sleek or menacing. They're squishy, rounded, almost like stress toys brought to life. The environments are packed with details that blend futuristic tech with human clutter. When Ohm modifies a car into a flying, slushy-fueled spaceship, it's not just inventive, it's visually absurd and strangely touching. That's a recurring move in Johnson style. Take something ridiculous and play it straight enough that it starts to mean something deeper. It's the same with those glowing emotional skin color, a small visual trick that ends up being one of the film's most expressive tools. Johnson uses it not just for laughs, but as a silent communicator of internal change. No need for monologue, just a color shift, and you know O's entire emotional state. Pacing-wise, Johnson keeps things brisk, but never breathless. The film moves fast. Sure, it is a road movie after all, but he gives each beat room to land. He doesn't rush through Tip and O's trust building or skip over emotional milestones. Instead, he spaces out the comic set pieces, like the gravity-defying convenience store raid or the bubble car chase, with moments of quiet bonding, where the camera slows, the world fades a little, and we sit with the characters. Those pauses are what give the emotional arcs time to grow. His narrative vision leans heavily on contrast. alien and human, logic and emotion, fear and friendship. But what's clever is that he never lets one side dominate. The Boov aren't just the villains. They're scared, misguided, and trying to survive, and Johnson directs them with just enough sympathy to make their arc feel more than cartoonish. Likewise, Tip isn't just the spunky human savior. She's a kid dealing with grief and fear. The way Johnson frames these characters, especially in their shared moments, gives both perspectives equal narrative weight. The message hits harder because he lets both characters grow without forcing one to simply follow the other. And then there's the music integration. While that's partly thanks to Rihanna's soundtrack, Johnson's direction makes sure the songs don't feel like cheap plugs. He uses them to set mood, punctuate emotional shifts, and even replace dialogue. When Tip and O float over Paris to the tune of a swelling track, it's not just a musical montage, it's a visual symphony of emotional healing and wonder, orchestrated with precision. Even the final showdown, if you can call it that, isn't about big explosions or CGI spectacle. It's about emotional payoff. Johnson directs the climax not as a battle but as a moment of truth, where vulnerability and empathy become the ultimate game changers. That choice alone flips the typical animated sci-fi formula on its head. Johnson's direction turns home into something that pulses with personality. Every shot, every gag, every heartfelt moment is infused with a playful sense of purpose. He doesn't just guide the story, he steers the emotional ship, making sure it lands not just on Earth, but squarely in the audience's chest. Cinematography in Home, 2015, isn't just about pretty frames. It's about crafting an entire alien-infused world that feels magical, absurd, and surprisingly emotional, all through the lens of animated visual storytelling. Since it's a fully CG animated film, everything is constructed from scratch, which means every angle, every beam of light, and every movement is a conscious decision. And in Home, those decisions are loud, vibrant, and full of character. Let's start with camera angles. This film loves playing with perspective, especially since so much of the story is seen through the eyes of characters who are complete strangers to each other's world. O is from a species that rearranges cities like moving furniture, and Tip is a kid navigating a world that's been flipped on its head. The camera reflects this constantly. When O first explores Earth, angles are often slightly tilted, off-center, or sweeping in exaggerated curves, echoing his unfamiliarity and awe. During chases or frantic moments, the angles go wild. Overhead spins, rapid zooms, fast lateral sweeps, creating a sense of energetic chaos. But when Tip and O begin to bond, the camera settles. Frames become centered, more intimate, more focused, reflecting the emotional grounding that's starting to take place between them. Lighting does some heavy lifting in shaping mood. During scenes of isolation or sadness, like Tip hiding alone in her apartment or O's moment of rejection, lighting shifts to cooler tones, soft shadows, and a subtle dimness that gives weight to their loneliness. But when moments of hope or excitement hit, the screen lights up in electric pinks, neon greens, and warm oranges. Take the slushiest car, for example. It's practically a character in itself, glowing like a moving lava lamp across epic backdrops. The lighting is never static. It reacts with the characters, changing with mood, tone, and music. And in key scenes, like when O begins to understand Tip's pain, the colors don't just pop. They melt into each other, blending warm and cool in a visual metaphor for emotional convergence. Framing is where things get clever. For a film about bridging differences, Home frequently uses dual framing, placing Tip and O in the same shot but on opposite sides of the frame, often separated by physical or visual barriers. Whether it's the windshield of the car, a city street, or just a contrasting splash of color, there's always something between them until there isn't. As their bond grows, the film begins to frame them closer and closer, often centered together, and eventually side by side in wide, open landscapes that mirror their emotional freedom. It's subtle visual storytelling, but it makes their connection feel tangible. Then there are the big, eye-popping visual moments, the ones that make your jaw drop even if you're not paying attention to the story. The Boov mothership hanging in the sky like a purple planet, the boovified cities draped in bubble wrap tech and pastel machinery, and the flying car gliding over a sparkling Paris skyline. These aren't just visual showpieces. They tell you something about the world. The absurdity of the Boov design clashes with human architecture, emphasizing how alien their presence is. And yet, over time, the visuals start to blend. Human and Boov elements combine into a shared world, subtly reflecting the story's central theme of connection and coexistence. The gravity shift scene inside the convenience store is a prime example of how cinematography adds fun and tension simultaneously. The floating, spinning camera combined with shifting lights and weightless objects creates a chaotic, disorienting effect, but it's also hilarious and playful. That kind of visual creativity doesn't just look cool. It captures the feeling of two completely different beings trying to navigate each other's realities. Even the Boov's color-changing skin ties into the cinematography. O's emotions become a literal visual element. His body becomes part of the lighting, part of the palette. It's a clever fusion of character design and visual storytelling that turns emotion into something you can see, not just hear or interpret. So while home may look like a candy-coated, kid-friendly sci-fi ride, its cinematography is quietly sophisticated. It crafts atmosphere, heightens emotion, and delivers spectacle without ever feeling hollow. It plays with space, color, and motion in ways that keep your eyes locked in, while your heart gets pulled along for the ride. Every shot is designed to reflect a feeling, whether it's joy, confusion, fear, or hope, and that's what makes the visuals so much more than just eye candy. They become a language of their own. The editing and pacing in Home, 2015, are like a high-energy dance that knows exactly when to leap, when to twirl, and when to slow down for a breath. It's a rhythm that feels designed not just for kids with short attention spans, but for anyone who enjoys a story that knows how to move without stumbling. The film opens with a burst, an alien invasion rendered in bright colors and manic energy, and from that moment on, it barely lets up. The transitions are fast but never confusing, switching between Boov headquarters, Tip's lonely apartment, and action-packed chases with ease. Every scene leads smoothly into the next, often using visual or musical cues to carry momentum forward. There's always something happening, whether it's a flying car skimming across the ocean, a slapstick alien misunderstanding, or an emotional memory flashback, and the editing makes sure you never feel like you're standing still. Montage is used smartly, too. When Tip and O begin their journey together, there are a few snappy montage sequences that show their evolving dynamic, scenes of bickering, bonding, dancing, and fixing up the slushiest car. These moments don't just fill time, they build the relationship without needing long dialogue-heavy scenes. The rhythm in these sequences is upbeat, often driven by Rihanna's soundtrack, and the editing keeps it snappy without sacrificing clarity. But what's really clever is how the pace shifts during emotional beats. When Tip shares her story about her mom, or when O begins to realize what friendship really means, the editing slows deliberately. Shots linger longer. There's space between lines. The camera holds just a little too long on O's face, or Tip's eyes, allowing the emotion to land. These pauses are the heartbeats of the film, and the editing gives them room to echo. Action scenes are edited with a punchy, kinetic rhythm that never loses coherence. Take the gravity-defying convenience store scene. There's chaos everywhere, but the cuts are smart. Each movement is clearly followed, each joke is timed just right, and the scene never overstays its welcome. It's not about fast cuts for the sake of speed, it's about pace that matches energy. Even the Boov's bubble-based tech is edited with a sense of whimsy. You'll see bubbles carrying furniture midair, entire buildings getting lifted, and all of it stitched together with seamless motion that feels like a visual roller coaster. The pacing of the narrative as a whole is surprisingly well-balanced. The first act is a whirlwind of introductions and world building, but it doesn't feel rushed because the editing keeps it light and visually engaging. The second act, the road trip, gives the characters time to develop, and the pacing slows just enough to let their friendship breathe. The third act ramps up again, but instead of relying on a traditional action-packed climax, it leans into emotional payoff. The rhythm of the story mirrors the rhythm of a growing relationship, awkward at first, bumpy in the middle, but ultimately smooth and heartfelt by the end. One of the most effective pacing tricks the film uses is repetition with variation. O's habit of misunderstanding Earth culture leads to recurring comedic setups, but each time the editing tightens the punchlines, making them feel fresh rather than repetitive. And the film is just shy of 95 minutes, which means there's no time for filler. Every sequence pushes character, plot, or tone forward, and the editing team clearly knew how to trim the fat without losing flavor. What you get is a film that flows like a song, full of tempo changes, but always staying in key. It jumps from absurd alien tech antics to poignant mother-daughter memories without missing a beat, and that kind of tonal control is all in the editing. It's what keeps the audience engaged, emotionally tethered, and visually entertained from start to finish. Whether you're 7 or 70, the film's pace pulls you along like you're in the passenger seat of the slushiest, flying through a story that knows exactly where it's going and how fast it should get there. The soundtrack and score in Home, 2015, don't just play in the background. They dance, they shout, they whisper, and sometimes they do all three in the same scene. This is a film where music isn't just decoration. It's a core part of the emotional storytelling, stitched directly into the fabric of the characters' journeys. From Rihanna's pop-powered anthems to the softer, more atmospheric score by Lorne Balfe, the soundscape of Home is always working to make you feel something, whether it's joy, sorrow, or the sudden realization that you're emotionally attached to a gelatinous alien with a nervous stammer. Rihanna isn't just a featured artist. She's essentially the film's emotional DJ. Several original tracks were made specifically for the movie, and they function like narrative companions to Tip's arc. Her voice becomes a kind of emotional narrator, echoing Tip's internal thoughts even when she's not saying them aloud. Towards the Sun, for example, is more than just a pop ballad. It plays during a transformative stretch of the journey, and its lyrics reflect Tip's growing courage and sense of purpose. The soaring vocals combined with lush, swelling instrumentals lift the scene into something much bigger than a simple road trip montage. Dancing in the Dark brings in playful energy, used in a scene that lets Tip and O finally connect not through words or mutual goals, but through pure fun. It's the kind of music cue that doesn't just lighten the mood, it solidifies a bond. It makes you smile, not just because the beat is catchy, but because the characters have earned that moment of joy. What's clever is how the film uses these songs not as random background filler, but as extensions of emotion. Each track is tied to a specific beat in the narrative, carefully placed to push the story forward without overpowering the dialogue or visuals. And yet, it's not wall-to-wall pop. Lorne Balfe's score fills in the emotional texture with elegance. His compositions are often more subtle, using light strings, playful piano, and ambient synths to create the emotional undercurrent of the film. When Tip is alone at the beginning, trying to survive in a Boov-occupied world, the score dips into softer, more melancholy tones, echoing her loneliness without making it overly dramatic. Balfe knows when to hold back. There are moments of near silence, where the absence of music becomes a presence in itself, letting a glance, a pause, or a single breath speak louder than any instrument could. As the film shifts from action to introspection and back again, the score keeps up without ever sounding disjointed. It adapts to the scene like a mood ring, sometimes whimsical, sometimes tender, and sometimes pulsing with tension. During scenes where the Boov tech is in full swing, or when O and Tip are racing away from danger, the music becomes bouncier and more electronic, keeping the energy high without drowning out the stakes. But it's in the quieter scenes, like when Tip reflects on her missing mother or when O finally makes the ultimate sacrifice, that the score shows its true power. Balfe pulls back, letting the silence stretch just long enough before easing in a delicate theme that gently tugs at your heartstrings. What's truly effective about the musical direction in Home is how it creates recurring motifs without becoming repetitive. There's a pattern of musical cues that signal key emotional shifts, Tip's connection to her mother, O's journey from fear to friendship, and the evolving trust between the two. These motifs come back in different forms, twisted slightly depending on the context, so that every return feels like an emotional echo. It builds familiarity, and more importantly, it builds emotional payoff. By the end of the film, When a particular melody plays again, slightly slower, slightly softer, you feel all the growth, all the change, wrapped up in just a few notes. So while Home may blast you with bubblegum beats and alien sound effects on the surface, its soundtrack and score are far from superficial. They are finely tuned emotional instruments, carefully layered into every moment of Tip and O's unlikely journey. Whether you're tapping your foot, tearing up, or laughing at a perfectly timed beat drop, the music never misses a chance to remind you that this isn't just an alien invasion movie. It's a story about feeling out of place, finding connection, and, yes, dancing your way toward the sun. At its core, Home, 2015, is a story wrapped in giggles and neon colors, but underneath the bubble-wrapped gadgets and flying slushy-powered cars, there's a surprisingly thoughtful exploration of identity, belonging, empathy, and the courage it takes to change. The film sneaks in these big ideas with a kind of gentle charm that doesn't hit you over the head, but it definitely lingers after the credits roll. One of the clearest themes is the feeling of being an outsider. O is the poster child or poster alien for social rejection. He's different from the other Boov, not because of his looks or skills, but because of his personality. He feels too much, talks too much, tries too hard. Sound familiar? It's a quiet but powerful nod to anyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong, whether that's due to personality, race, neurodiversity, or simply being the weird kid in class. O's journey is not about becoming more like everyone else. It's about embracing his uniqueness and finding people who value it. That's a message that hits especially hard in a world where conformity often feels like the price of acceptance. Tip's story mirrors this theme from a human perspective. She's a young girl trying to hold it together after an alien race invades Earth and separates her from her mother. She's resourceful and fierce, but also scared and vulnerable. As one of the few humans not relocated by the Boov, she becomes an outsider in her own world. Her struggle isn't just to survive, it's to stay connected to her roots, her family, and her identity in a world that's suddenly upside down. And then you realize something. The alien and the human aren't that different. They're both lost, both lonely, both looking for someone who understands them. That's where the theme of empathy comes charging in. Empathy is probably the most important message Home delivers, and it does it through the bond between two completely incompatible beings. The film doesn't say, "Hey, be nice to others." It shows the slow, sometimes awkward, but ultimately beautiful process of learning to understand someone else's pain, culture, and perspective. O doesn't magically become a good friend overnight. Tip doesn't instantly forgive the Boov. They argue. They misunderstand each other. But they keep trying. That's the heart of empathy, not perfect understanding, but the willingness to bridge the gap. Another striking theme is the idea of family, not just the kind you're born into, but the kind you build. Tip's quest to reunite with her mother anchors the emotional stakes of the film. It's a straightforward goal, but it brings up deeper questions about what it means to feel safe, seen, and loved. O, in contrast, has no real concept of family. The Boov operate like a bureaucracy of emotionless efficiency. But through Tip, he learns about love, sacrifice, loyalty, and that strange human magic called home. Not a place, but a feeling. It's not subtle, but it works because the film earns it. You watch O literally rewire his sense of purpose and loyalty. By the end, his definition of home changes, and so does ours. There's also a sharp, often overlooked message about colonialism and forced relocation. The Boov don't invade Earth with guns or destruction. They just decide they deserve it more and shove humans out of the way. It's played with a candy-colored coat, but the subtext is powerful. The humans are moved like livestock. Their lives are disrupted, their cultures ignored, and the Boov see themselves as benevolent overlords. The film doesn't dwell on it darkly, but it's there, simmering underneath. And it makes O's decision to stand against his own people even more meaningful. He chooses justice and compassion over obedience, and that's not just character growth, it's a moral stance. Even Captain Smek, with all his ridiculousness, embodies the dangers of blind leadership and arrogance. His refusal to listen, his belief that fear is wisdom, and his obsession with control represent a cautionary tale about authority gone unchallenged. He's the embodiment of "we've always done it this way," and the story makes it very clear. That mindset leads to isolation, failure, and eventual irrelevance. And let's not forget the theme of fear versus bravery. The Boov are terrified of conflict and emotion, which is why they run from everything. Their entire culture is built on avoidance. But the film dismantles that idea by showing that true bravery isn't in running or conquering, it's in connection, in being vulnerable, in showing up for someone even when it's uncomfortable or scary. Home packs all of this into a sleek, funny, heartwarming package, making it easy to enjoy on the surface, but hard to forget once it's over. It doesn't force its messages. They bubble up naturally through the characters, their choices, and the strange, lovable mess of their journey. It tells us that you don't have to be perfect, normal, or even from the same planet to find where you belong. You just have to care enough to try. In Home, 2015, visual effects and CGI aren't just tools, they are the entire playground. This isn't a film that blends CGI with practical effects. It's pure, unfiltered digital animation from head to toe, and it wears that digital skin with pride. The world of Home is built from scratch, and every single frame is a carefully polished piece of visual storytelling. The Boov themselves are a perfect example of how CGI is used to craft not just creatures, but a whole species with their own physical logic. They're soft, round, constantly morphing little aliens with rubbery bodies and shifting skin colors that change with emotion. That emotional color shift isn't just a fun gimmick, it's an essential storytelling device that only works because of how smooth and responsive the animation is. You don't need words to know what O is feeling. His entire body becomes a mood ring, glowing with nervous pinks, sorrowful blues, or flustered purples. That's CGI used not for spectacle, but for character. And then there's the Boov technology, which is peak visual absurdity, in a good way. Bubble-based transportation systems, levitating toilets, slushy-powered flying cars, and entire cities wrapped in what looks like candy-colored plastic wrap. None of this would even be possible in live action without looking ridiculous, but in the animated world of Home, the CGI makes it all feel natural. The animation style leans heavily into rounded, colorful, toy-like aesthetics. Nothing has sharp edges. Everything bounces, floats, and sparkles with soft lighting and smooth textures, giving the world a sense of whimsical elasticity. The CGI here is immersive not because it mimics realism, but because it's consistent. Once you're inside the world of Home, its physics and logic all follow the same rules, and that makes the ridiculous feel grounded in its own universe. The flying car, aka the Slushius, is a character in itself. Its transformation from a broken-down compact into a neon-lit, gravity-defying, soda-fueled spaceship is a masterclass in visual play. The way it moves, hovers, and interacts with environments is animated with a sense of weight and speed that makes every chase scene feel thrilling. There's no moment where the animation stutters or feels awkward. Instead, the car becomes a stage for some of the film's most inventive set pieces, from zero-gravity shopping chaos to mid-air standoffs. Environmental CGI is another major highlight. The Boov don't just land on Earth, they redecorate. Cities are transformed into alien-augmented landscapes with floating platforms, translucent tubes, and bizarre glowing architecture that somehow merges seamlessly with Earth's landmarks. When Tip and O glide over Paris, you get a surreal fusion of the familiar and the strange. The Eiffel Tower lit up with alien tech, streets wrapped in bubble energy. It's not just pretty to look at. It deepens the sense that this is a world completely transformed, and yet still emotionally accessible. Even background details are rich with movement and life. Bubbles float through the air like currency. Boov gadgets transform and unfold with fluid mechanics that make each frame feel alive. And in the more emotional or intimate scenes, the CGI pulls back just enough to focus on facial expressions. The technology is used with restraint when it needs to be. It never overwhelms the characters or distracts from the emotion. Instead, it highlights it. Tip's expressions are especially well-crafted. Her eyes, posture, and subtle lip movements all work in sync with Rihanna's voice to make her feel authentically human in a world of glowing aliens. There's also something brilliant in how the CGI animators create contrast. The Boov world is hyper-smooth, symmetrical, and bubble-wrapped. The human world is messier, more angular, filled with clutter and texture. When these two styles clash, like when O enters Tip's apartment or she hacks Boov tech with street smarts, you see the two worlds visually colliding. It's a layered use of CGI that communicates theme through design, without a single word of dialogue. Nothing ever looks out of place. The alien ships, the bubble architecture, the wild gadgets, they don't feel like add-ons or visual noise. They belong. They enhance the feeling of stepping into a universe that's been playfully turned inside out. The effects aren't just decorative, they're integral to the film's identity. They help tell the story. They deepen character. And most of all, they make home feel like a world where the impossible is not only possible, it's totally normal. In this movie, CGI isn't trying to fool your eyes into believing it's real. It's trying to spark your imagination into believing it could be. Set design and locations in Home, 2015, are a wild, candy-colored collision of the familiar and the absurd, and that's exactly what makes them so engaging. The world building here isn't just for decoration. It tells a story with every background, every floating sofa, and every slushy-fueled upgrade. From the very beginning, we're thrown into a world that's been taken over and improved by the Boov, a species obsessed with efficiency, safety, and a delightfully misguided sense of aesthetics. The way the Boov transform Earth is one of the most visually playful aspects of the film, and the set design leans into that concept hard. Let's talk about the Boovified cities. When the Boov relocate humanity and repurpose human buildings, they don't destroy, they decorate. Think Earth meets IKEA in outer space. Everything is rounded, brightly colored, and floating just a little too much. Streets are lined with translucent tubes that serve as highways. Public monuments get covered in bubble wrap and reimagined as Boov stations. It's bizarre, but it's done with such enthusiasm that it feels oddly believable within the universe. This isn't destruction, it's cheerful disruption. The set design here adds depth by visually representing the Boov mindset. They don't understand Earth culture, so they rebuild it in their own image, sterile, functional, and hilariously oblivious to human meaning. Now flip to Tip's world. The human spaces left behind or hidden from Boov control. Tip's apartment is filled with personal touches, clutter, and warmth. Her car, the now famous Slushius, becomes an evolving symbol of resistance and resourcefulness. It's not just a vehicle, it's a workshop, a bedroom, a getaway car, and a makeshift spaceship. And the way it's been rigged with Boov tech mixed with human junk food machines says everything about Tip and O's growing bond. Each upgrade they slap onto that car, light-up rims, gravity controls, soda fountains, is another layer in their partnership, and the visual design keeps up with every step. The car is a set piece in constant transformation, reflecting the arc of their relationship. Then there are the big set pieces that feel like destinations in a globe-trotting quest. The convenience store scene, shelves floating, snacks orbiting, gravity going haywire, is a location used to its fullest potential. It's not just a backdrop for jokes, it becomes a stage for chaos, bonding, and one of the best zero-gravity dance sequences in animated film. Another standout is the Paris sequence. The Eiffel Tower is repurposed into a kind of launch pad for Boov operations, its classic form merged with alien add-ons. But it still feels like Paris. The animators didn't erase landmarks, they reimagined them through alien eyes. This helps keep the world grounded in something recognizable, while still letting it soar into full sci-fi territory. Even the Boov mothership is a masterclass in visual personality. Inside, it's all smooth curves, glowing floors, and endless bureaucratic chaos. It feels like walking through a digital toy store where every hallway is just a little too clean, a little too round, and a little too impersonal. That sterile, hyper-organized design contrasts beautifully with Tip's messy humanity, making it more than just a cool space. It becomes a commentary on what the Boov value and what they're missing. Props play a huge role too. Pig the cat is not just a companion. He becomes part of the scenery in every human space, a comforting symbol of normalcy. O's communicator, Tip's phone, the Boov translation devices, they all look like they came out of a toy box, and that's what makes them work. The design doesn't chase realism. It chases storytelling. Every prop has personality, and more importantly, a point. You learn about the characters by what they build, carry, or live in. What really sells the locations is how dynamic they are. Nothing stays static. As Tip and O travel from city to city, you see the different ways the Boov have reshaped Earth, and it never feels like a copy-paste job. Australia has its own version of Boov influence. The floating colonies have their own layout and lighting. The attention to variety gives the journey real texture. You feel like they're moving through a vast, altered world, not just driving around a loop of interchangeable backdrops. So whether it's a suburban apartment turned sanctuary, a transformed cityscape lit by alien neon, or a mothership shaped like a toddler's dream of architecture, the set design and home isn't just eye candy. It's character. It's culture clash. It's emotional space made physical. Every location, every prop, every odd-looking object in the background contributes to the film's charm, its humor, and its surprisingly rich sense of place. The dialogue and script in Home, 2015, are a quirky blend of comedic timing, emotional resonance, and sheer linguistic chaos, and that's exactly what gives the film its charm. It doesn't aim for poetic prose or philosophical monologues. Instead, it leans full force into character voice, especially with the Boov, whose hilariously broken English becomes one of the film's most distinctive features. O, voiced by Jim Parsons, is a walking grammar error with a heart of gold, and the way he speaks is as much a part of his identity as his color-changing skin. Lines like, "Can I come into the out now?" and "I do not fit in, I fit out," are instantly memorable not just because they're funny, but because they say so much about who he is. His way of speaking is sincere, literal, and laced with loneliness, which makes the humor hit even harder. He's not trying to be funny, he's trying to connect. And that attempt, however clumsy, adds an emotional undercurrent to nearly every line he delivers. The brilliance of the script is that it never mocks O's speech. It embraces it. The film finds a way to make his voice pattern not just a source of comedy, but a form of storytelling. His dialogue reflects his alien worldview. He doesn't understand metaphor or sarcasm, and watching him navigate human phrases creates a perfect setup for humor that's also surprisingly touching. Even a simple, "I am not happy with this turn of events," becomes comedy gold when said in a moment of panic. The script keeps O's lines short, rhythmic, and packed with emotion, giving him a distinct cadence that stands out against everyone else. Tip's dialogue, by contrast, is grounded and emotionally authentic. She talks like a real kid, not overly precocious, not melodramatic. Her sarcasm, her frustration, her moments of vulnerability all come across naturally. She doesn't spout wisdom, she speaks from instinct. That's what makes her emotional scenes feel raw and believable. When she says, "My mom is not one of the missing. I am," it hits like a quiet gut punch. It's not a line drenched in dramatic flair. It's simple, honest, and devastating. And it says everything about how displaced she feels in a world turned upside down. The interactions between Tip and O are where the script truly shines. Their dialogue is a constant tug-of-war between misunderstanding and connection. He says things in the most awkward, overly formal way possible. She responds with teenage side-eye and snappy comebacks. But as the story progresses, their conversations become less about conflict and more about learning. The script subtly shifts their tone from defensive to collaborative. You start to hear them echoing each other's phrases. They begin to understand without explaining. It's clever writing that shows how emotional language can evolve, not through lectures, but through shared experience. Captain Smek's dialogue is a different beast altogether. He speaks with an inflated sense of self-importance, every line delivered with the certainty of a clueless leader. Lines like, "You have made a mockery of my authority," and "I do not like to be mocked." It makes me feel mockable, are ridiculous, but they perfectly capture the absurdity of a leader who thinks fear equals wisdom. His lines are cartoonishly self-centered, but the script uses them to satirize authority and arrogance in a way that kids laugh at and adults quietly nod along with. The script also knows when to back off and let silence do the work. It doesn't overload emotional scenes with dialogue. When Tip reunites with her mom, the moment isn't padded with a dramatic speech. It's raw and tearful, carried more by body language and expressions than words. That restraint gives the few lines that are spoken even more power. Throughout the film, the writing is peppered with clever turns of phrase, emotional truths, and running jokes that never wear out their welcome. The recurring gag of, "oh, misunderstanding human customs" is handled with just enough variety that it always feels fresh. There are also quiet, reflective lines that sneak in between the chaos. Lines about fear, about being different, about choosing to stand up when running would be easier. The dialogue in Home doesn't aim to be epic or overly clever. It aims to sound like these characters would actually talk, and in doing so, it captures something more important than elegance. It captures personality. It gives every character a distinct voice, uses that voice to reflect growth, and crafts moments that are funny, touching, and deeply memorable. The result is a script that balances slapstick and sincerity with surprising finesse. Whether you're laughing at O's bizarre phrasing or tearing up at Tip's quiet honesty, the words stick with you, not because they're perfect, but because they're real. Home, 2015, is a sci-fi adventure comedy on the surface, but it doesn't just tick boxes. It plays with the genre like it's building a pillow fort in a spaceship. It takes familiar conventions, aliens, world invasions, road trips, mismatched buddies, and bends them into a shape that feels fresh, funny, and surprisingly heartfelt. Instead of delivering a grand, epic tale of planetary doom or rebellion, it scales everything down to a story about friendship, fear, and finding your place in a world that feels completely out of your control. And it does that while flying a slushy-fueled car through a world half redecorated by aliens who don't understand doorknobs. The film absolutely plays with genre expectations. In most alien invasion stories, the extraterrestrials are the obvious threat. In Home, the Boov are the invaders, but they're not malicious. They're terrified. They don't conquer Earth with brute force or sinister agendas. They relocate humans like nervous houseguests rearranging furniture. That twist alone sets the tone for the entire film. The Boov are the most non-threatening invaders in sci-fi history, emotionally repressed, allergic to confrontation, and adorably clueless. By flipping the invaders into anxious bureaucrats, the film deflates the usual tension and replaces it with comedy and pathos. It's not about defeating the aliens. It's about understanding them. Even the protagonist dynamic twists genre norms. Usually, it's the brave, battle-ready human leading the charge with an alien sidekick for comic relief. Here, you've got Tip, a tough, independent girl who wants her mom back, and O, the alien who's more afraid of sending an email than getting captured. He's not the fearless hero. He's the mistake-prone oddball who somehow finds the courage to change. The buddy road trip formula is there, but it's filtered through this odd couple setup where both characters have equal emotional stakes. Their relationship isn't built on one saving the other. It's about slowly earning each other's trust, which gives the genre a much-needed heart injection. As far as comedy goes, the film delivers it through both character and concept. The Boov are walking punchlines, thanks to their bizarre logic and butchered grammar, but the humor never feels lazy. It's not just gags, it's built into the world. Why do the Boov run from conflict? Why do they misinterpret basic human expressions? Why does O think my hands are in the air like, I just do not care is a literal greeting? These aren't just jokes. They're examples of how sci-fi tropes can be turned into fish-out-of-water humor that feels earned. The humor is accessible for kids, but clever enough for adults to grin through it. And then there's the emotional undercurrent that most genre films skate past. The drama in Home is grounded in deeply personal stakes. It's not about saving the world. It's about Tip trying to find her mother, and O trying to find anyone who actually wants him around. The sci-fi elements, floating cities, alien gadgets, wormhole travel, are never the point. They're just the background for a very human story about feeling out of place. That's a bold genre move. Instead of escalating toward a huge final battle, the climax is emotional. It's about making a choice to help others even when it means risking everything. No laser beams, no giant robots, just a quiet, brave moment that redefines what a hero looks like in this kind of movie. The film also sidesteps the typical villain trope. Captain Smek isn't evil. He's misguided, pompous, and scared of change. That makes him more interesting than the standard mustache-twirling antagonist. It also forces the characters to win not by destroying the enemy, but by changing the system from within. It's about growth, not conquest. The only real villain here is fear. Fear of being different, fear of connection, fear of messing up. And that's something you don't normally get as the core conflict in a genre built on explosions and world-ending stakes. Action scenes are sprinkled in, but they're used more for fun than tension. The zero-gravity convenience store scene is a perfect example. It's full of chaos and wild physics, but the stakes are small and the focus is character interaction. Even the big chase scenes avoid becoming heavy or intense. The editing and score keep things breezy and fun, while still pushing the story forward. There are some genre cliches in play: lonely child protagonist, bumbling alien sidekick, oddball friendship, but Home uses them with enough self-awareness that they feel fresh. The cliches become starting points, not crutches. And it's the combination of genres, sci-fi, buddy comedy, family drama, that really gives the film its identity. It doesn't just dip a toe into each one, it jumps in and splashes around, blending them with confidence and heart. So while Home might look like a light, silly animated flick at first glance, it's actually a genre blender that knows exactly what it's doing. It keeps the fun, softens the tropes, and reimagines classic sci-fi beats through the lens of empathy, laughter, and a girl with her cat and a fugitive alien in a flying car. Home, 2015, may look like a colorful alien road trip romp, but buried beneath the bubble-wrap buildings and flying slushy cars is a surprisingly rich layer of social and cultural commentary. This is a movie that talks about some very real, very human issues: immigration, displacement, cultural erasure, race, identity, and belonging, without ever waving a giant flag about it. It doesn't lecture. It uses its weird little aliens and its feisty human protagonist to show how these topics play out in ways kids and adults can both absorb, often without even realizing it's happening. Let's start with the Boov invasion. On the surface, it's silly. Aliens land on Earth, politely move humans out of the way, and redecorate everything. But dig a little deeper, and it's not just a sci-fi plot device. It's a metaphor for colonialism and forced relocation. The Boov see humans as inefficient and in need of improvement, so they decide to take over, not violently, but paternalistically. They relocate people into colorful little human preserves, give them candy, and tell them it's all for their own good. It's eerily reflective of real-world history where dominant groups uproot native populations for their benefit, often destroying culture and community in the process. The Boov don't see themselves as villains. They think they're saviors. That's the most chilling part, and the film lets that irony sit without hammering it too hard. Tip's story adds another layer to this. She's the only human who didn't get relocated, left behind in a world that doesn't look like hers anymore. She's a young black girl, and that matters. Not because it's pointed out by the film explicitly, but because her presence as the central human protagonist brings racial identity into the conversation naturally. She's isolated. She's mistrusted by the Boov. She's underestimated. And yet, she's the most emotionally intelligent, grounded, and capable character in the story. In a genre that usually defaults to white, male protagonists saving the world, Home flips the script and gives us a young girl of color saving herself, guiding the alien, and holding the emotional heart of the story. That kind of representation speaks volumes, especially in an animated film aimed at children. Ozark explores what it means to be othered. He's an outsider among outsiders, a Boov who doesn't fit the mold. His community treats him as a nuisance, constantly leaving him out and mocking his attempts to connect. He makes mistakes. He talks funny. He doesn't understand how to blend in. But instead of changing who he is to earn acceptance, He learns to embrace his differences and surround himself with those who accept him. It's a quiet but powerful message about identity and self-worth. It mirrors the experiences of kids who don't fit into societal norms, whether that's due to neurodivergence, language barriers, cultural background, or simply being weird. O isn't fixed, he's celebrated. That's a radical message in a world that often pressures kids to conform. The movie also touches on themes of fear and propaganda. The Boov's entire way of life is driven by fear. They're terrified of conflict, of mistakes, of change. Their leader, Captain Smek, uses fear as a tool to control and manipulate. He tells them to avoid humans, to distrust emotion, to flee from danger. It's an exaggerated version of how fear is weaponized in politics and media, but the parallels are there. The Boov don't question authority because they've been taught that survival depends on obedience. And when O starts to think for himself, the system turns on him. It's a playful but pointed look at how institutions discourage dissent and curiosity, especially from those who don't fit the mold. Tip and O's relationship itself is a kind of cultural bridge. Two beings from entirely different worlds forced into a car together, trying to survive and make sense of each other. Their misunderstandings, linguistic, emotional, cultural, are the source of both conflict and connection. Watching them slowly learn each other's language, fears, and values is a beautiful metaphor for cross-cultural friendship. They don't just tolerate each other, they change each other. And that change doesn't require either of them to erase who they are. Instead, they learn to see the world through each other's eyes. Even little things like Tip hacking alien tech with a smartphone or using pop music to express emotion reflect real-world resilience and cultural blending. Human culture isn't crushed by the invasion. It adapts, survives, and sometimes outsmarts the invaders. Tip doesn't rely on alien tech to solve problems. She uses her own creativity, her own voice, her own roots. That's a subtle but powerful nod to the strength of cultural identity, even under pressure. Home wraps all this in humor, heart, and sparkly alien absurdity, but its commentary is there if you're paying attention. It speaks to issues that kids are already feeling, what it means to be left out, misunderstood, scared, or different, and it reassures them that those differences don't need to be erased. They can be the very thing that saves the day. It doesn't force the message. It lets the journey speak for itself, which is exactly why it lands. Home, 2015, doesn't fit snugly into one genre box, and that's part of why it stands out when you start comparing it to other animated sci-fi comedies aimed at family audiences. While many films in this space go for big spectacle, epic world-building, or rapid-fire jokes, Home marches to the beat of its own bubble-powered drum. It borrows pieces from genre predecessors, Alien Invasion, Buddy Road Trip, Family Reunion Quest, but reshapes them into something that feels emotionally grounded, culturally thoughtful, and completely its own. When stacked up against similar animated adventures, it doesn't try to out-spectacle them. It out-empathizes them. Take Lilo and Stitch, for example, another animated oddball friendship between a young girl and a weird alien. On paper, Home looks like a spiritual cousin. But where Lilo and Stitch leans into Hawaiian culture, grief, and mischief, Home blends cultural identity with displacement and identity on a global scale. Tip isn't just trying to tame chaos like Lilo is. She's trying to survive it and make sense of a world stolen from her. And unlike Stitch, who's chaotic but cool, O is deeply uncool in the best way. He's more vulnerable, more insecure, more likely to cry and panic and break your heart in the middle of a joke. That difference shifts the emotional center. Home isn't about taming the alien. It's about healing with him. Then there's Despicable Me, which shares the bright color palette, goofy tone, and oddball lead. But where Despicable Me relies heavily on slapstick and villain-turned-dad tropes, Home plays it slower, more character-first. It doesn't crowd the screen with dozens of sidekicks or wacky diversions. The emotional arc stays focused on O and Tip, and that laser focus makes their connection more intimate. It's a smaller, more contained story emotionally, even if it flies across continents. The comedy in Despicable Me often comes from absurdity layered on absurdity, while Home mines humor from genuine misunderstanding and cultural differences, which means the jokes feel tied to character, not just punchlines. If you line Home up next to something like Megamind, another animated alien outcast story, it looks even more distinctive. Megamind parodies superhero tropes with fast-paced wit and visual chaos. Home doesn't parody anything. It doesn't wink at the audience. It takes its emotional beat seriously, even when the world is covered in floating bubble tubes. That earnestness can feel rare in an animated landscape that often leans on irony or meta-humor. Home isn't trying to be cool or edgy. It's trying to tell a story about being scared, being different, and finding family, and it tells that story with wide-eyed sincerity. Compared to other DreamWorks films, Home sits in an interesting spot. It's less bombastic than How to Train Your Dragon and less frenetic than Madagascar. It doesn't have the sweeping scale of Dragons or the celebrity ensemble energy of Shrek, though it does borrow the pop soundtrack trick that Shrek popularized. But while Shrek weaponized pop music for parody and irreverence, Home uses it for emotional resonance. Rihanna's songs aren't tossed in for fun. They reflect Tip's journey, her heartbreak, her determination. That musical thread gives Home a kind of pop soul that's hard to replicate. Even when you look at it through the lens of director Tim Johnson's other works, Home feels like a pivot. Johnson previously co-directed Ants, which was all about existential angst in a hyper-organized society, and Over the Hedge, a frenetic satire about suburban sprawl. Both of those were louder, more satirical, more adult in their humor. Home steps away from that edge. It's softer, gentler, more emotionally accessible. The humor is less cynical, the characters more innocent. It may not be the most complex film in terms of plot, but it's probably the most emotionally vulnerable in Johnson's filmography, and that's what gives it its staying power. Where many animated sci-fi films go for scale and speed, Home chooses intimacy and emotional detail. Where others rely on cultural stereotypes, Home makes a quiet statement by casting a young black girl as its heart. Where other alien stories focus on conflict and conquest, Home focuses on misunderstanding and empathy. It trades genre tropes for gentler truths, replacing the need to be epic with the need to be meaningful. It may follow a familiar formula on the surface, but the way it plays each beat, with sincerity, vulnerability, and a whole lot of Boov brand awkwardness, makes it unmistakably one of a kind. Home, 2015, doesn't fit snugly into one genre box, and that's part of why it stands out when you start comparing it to other animated sci-fi comedies aimed at family audiences. While many films in this space go for big spectacle, epic world-building, or rapid-fire jokes, Home marches to the beat of its own bubble-powered drum. It borrows pieces from genre predecessors, Alien Invasion, Buddy Road Trip, Family Reunion Quest, but reshapes them into something that feels emotionally grounded, culturally thoughtful, and completely its own. When stacked up against similar animated adventures, it doesn't try to out-spectacle them. It out-empathizes them. Take Lilo and Stitch, for example, another animated oddball friendship between a young girl and a weird alien. On paper, Home looks like a spiritual cousin. But where Lilo and Stitch leans into Hawaiian culture, grief, and mischief, Home blends cultural identity with displacement and identity on a global scale. Tip isn't just trying to tame chaos like Lilo is, she's trying to survive it and make sense of a world stolen from her. And unlike Stitch, who's chaotic but cool, O is deeply uncool in the best way. He's more vulnerable, more insecure, more likely to cry and panic and break your heart in the middle of a joke. That difference shifts the emotional center. Home isn't about taming the alien. It's about healing with him. Then there's Despicable Me, which shares the bright color palette, goofy tone, and oddball lead. But where Despicable Me relies heavily on slapstick and villain-turned-dad tropes, Home plays it slower, more character-first. It doesn't crowd the screen with dozens of sidekicks or wacky diversions. The emotional arc stays focused on O and Tip, and that laser focus makes their connection more intimate. It's a smaller, more contained story emotionally, even if it flies across continents. The comedy in Despicable Me often comes from absurdity layered on absurdity, while Home mines humor from genuine misunderstanding and cultural differences, which means the jokes feel tied to character, not just punchlines. If you line Home up next to something like Megamind, another animated alien outcast story, it looks even more distinctive. Megamind parodies superhero tropes with fast-paced wit and visual chaos. Home doesn't parody anything. It doesn't wink at the audience. It takes its emotional beat seriously, even when the world is covered in floating bubble tubes. That earnestness can feel rare in an animated landscape that often leans on irony or meta-humor. Home isn't trying to be cool or edgy. It's trying to tell a story about being scared, being different, and finding family, and it tells that story with wide-eyed sincerity. Compared to other DreamWorks films, Home sits in an interesting spot. It's less bombastic than How to Train Your Dragon and less frenetic than Madagascar. It doesn't have the sweeping scale of Dragons or the celebrity ensemble energy of Shrek, though it does borrow the pop soundtrack trick that Shrek popularized. But while Shrek weaponized pop music for parody and irreverence, Home uses it for emotional resonance. Rihanna's songs aren't tossed in for fun. They reflect Tip's journey, her heartbreak, her determination. That musical thread gives Home a kind of pop soul that's hard to replicate. Even when you look at it through the lens of director Tim Johnson's other works, Home feels like a pivot. Johnson previously co-directed Ants, which was all about existential angst in a hyper-organized society, and Over the Hedge, a frenetic satire about suburban sprawl. Both of those were louder, more satirical, more adult in their humor. Home steps away from that edge. It's softer, gentler, more emotionally accessible. The humor is less cynical, the characters more innocent. It may not be the most complex film in terms of plot, but it's probably the most emotionally vulnerable in Johnson's filmography, and that's what gives it its staying power. Where many animated sci-fi films go for scale and speed, Home chooses intimacy and emotional detail. Where others rely on cultural stereotypes, Home makes a quiet statement by casting a young black girl as its heart. Where other alien stories focus on conflict and conquest, Home focuses on misunderstanding and empathy. It trades genre tropes for gentler truths, replacing the need to be epic with the need to be meaningful. It may follow a familiar formula on the surface, but the way it plays each beat, with sincerity, vulnerability, and a whole lot of Boov brand awkwardness, makes it unmistakably one of a kind. Home, 2015, might look like a bubbly, neon-colored ride through alien chaos and goofy misunderstandings, but tucked beneath the giggles and flying slushies is a surprising amount of symbolism and metaphor that gives the story unexpected depth. This isn't just a movie about an alien invasion. It's a film layered with visual cues and character choices that reflect real-world struggles about identity, belonging, family, and transformation. The storytelling is doing far more than what's spoken. It's showing ideas through movement, color, design, and the way characters evolve. Let's start with the most obvious and brilliant visual motif: color. The Boov don't just talk funny or move weirdly. They change color based on their emotions. This is more than a character quirk. It's a metaphor for emotional vulnerability. For a species that fears expression and avoids deep connection, having your feelings physically exposed through color is both beautiful and terrifying. O's body is a living emotional barometer. He turns purple when confused, blue when sad, pink when scared, green when lying, and bursts into orange when joyful. There's no hiding. You literally wear your heart on your skin. That kind of raw openness isn't just funny. It reflects the discomfort people feel when emotions are laid bare in front of others. It's a metaphor for being emotionally naked, and O's journey is partly about learning to stop being ashamed of that vulnerability. Then you have Tip's car, the Slushius, which is pure metaphor in motion. It starts as a beat-up, ordinary human car, practical, familiar, grounded. As Tip and O form their unlikely alliance, they begin modifying it together using Boov technology and human creativity. It becomes a literal vehicle of fusion between cultures. Slushy machines power its engines. Boov gadgets control its flight. Human design holds it all together. The more trust they build, the more the car evolves. It becomes a symbol of cooperation, adaptation, and blended identity. It's not one culture overriding the other. It's a joyful, messy mix of both. It's a flying metaphor for unity. The concept of home itself is treated symbolically throughout. For the Boov, home is wherever they feel safe, typically on the run, always hiding, never rooted. They never truly settle. They conquer and flee, conquer and flee. But they don't understand belonging. O is the first of them to question this cycle. For Tip, home is her mother. It's not a place, it's a person, a feeling, a connection. That contrast plays out across every scene. While the Boov try to rebuild Earth in their image, Tip is searching for something deeper and more intangible. The film's title isn't just literal, it's the central metaphor for everything the characters are striving toward. Not a house, not a place, a feeling of being understood, accepted, and loved. Captain Smek's shusher, his goofy, overpowered staff, becomes a metaphor for authority wielded without empathy. It's a tool of fear and control, used to silence dissent and maintain order. Smek doesn't listen, he silences. The fact that he eventually loses it and his power crumbles afterward isn't just a plot twist. It's symbolic. It reflects the collapse of leadership that relies on fear rather than understanding. When the Boov start listening to each other, when they stop being ruled by fear, real change begins. The shusher breaking is more than a gag. It's the visual end of that fear-based system. Another rich metaphor lies in the use of bubbles. The Boov wrap everything in bubbles. They travel in them, they use them to transport people, store items, shield themselves. On one hand, bubbles look fun and harmless. On the other, they represent emotional insulation. Boov don't interact deeply. They contain and protect themselves in smooth, sealed-off comfort zones. They are literally and figuratively living in bubbles. The moment O starts popping those protective spheres, taking risks, making emotional connections, is the moment he begins to grow. The bubble motif is everywhere, and it represents the safety of avoidance versus the risk of real connection. Tip's cat, Pig, is another subtle symbol. On the surface, Pig is a comedic sidekick, lounging lazily and offering the occasional meow. But look closer, and Pig is a quiet, constant presence of normalcy, stability, and warmth. In a world that's been turned upside down, Pig never changes. He represents memory, home, and what Tip is fighting to hold on to. He grounds her emotionally. Even when things get chaotic, Pig never panics. He's comfort personified, a little fuzzy anchor in the madness. And don't forget the importance of music in the film. Not just as soundtrack, but as emotional expression. Tip uses music as a form of comfort and communication. It's something purely human that the Boov don't understand. When O begins to appreciate it, it symbolizes his shift from logical Boov thinking to emotional human understanding. Music becomes a metaphor for expression, freedom, and connection without needing translation. There's even symbolism in the Boov's constant running from the Gorg. They are a race built on escape. But the big twist, that the Gorg are not destroyers but desperate parents, flips everything on its head. The Boov's entire existence has been shaped by a misunderstanding born from fear. This becomes a broader metaphor for how fear of the unknown can define entire societies. The journey to understanding is literal, emotional, and symbolic. When O chooses to confront the Gorg instead of running, he breaks the cycle of fear that the Boov have lived in for generations. Home uses these metaphors not as decoration, but as narrative DNA. They're what give the story its shape and meaning, even when the screen is filled with bouncing aliens and glow-stick architecture. The film never stops being fun, but every bubble, every color shift, every gadget and gesture is part of a bigger picture, a visual, symbolic language about what it means to belong, to feel, to grow, and to connect. It's storytelling with heart and hidden layers, wrapped in an intergalactic sugar rush. Home, 2015, isn't part of a massive multi-film franchise, but it does live in an interesting cultural and creative pocket that gives it its own kind of legacy. It's adapted loosely from Adam Rex's book The True Meaning of Smekday, but rather than setting off a sprawling cinematic universe or a trilogy, Home carved out a self-contained space and then quietly expanded into other formats. It doesn't follow the usual DreamWorks pattern of sequels and spin-offs the way Shrek, How to Train Your Dragon, or Madagascar did. Instead, it exists as a kind of one-shot heart piece that later found life through a Netflix series, *Home, Adventures with Tip and O*, which push the world and characters further while leaning more into the comedic and episodic vibe. That in itself makes Home an outlier. Most animated features that do well enough at the box office immediately queue up plans for sequels, especially when they come from a studio like DreamWorks. But Home wasn't built to expand through epic lore or world-ending stakes. It was designed to resolve itself emotionally. The movie ends with its characters healed, bonded, and at peace. There's no open cliffhanger, no hints at deeper villains or ancient prophecies. It wraps up like a warm hug. That kind of narrative completeness makes it different from the bigger franchises around it. It doesn't try to sell you the next chapter. It gives you everything in one go, and that makes its impact feel more personal. The Netflix series that followed acts more like a playful extension rather than a true continuation. It explores the day-to-day silliness of human Boov integration and lets Tip and O just be goofy roommates trying to understand each other's cultures. It drops the high-stakes tension and focuses on jokes, school, holidays, weird Boov behavior, and slice-of-life comedy. If the movie is the emotional core, the series is the comic relief encore. It doesn't deepen the dramatic themes of the film, it just lets you hang out in the world longer. It was fun, bright, and had its own charm, but it never aimed for the same kind of layered emotional storytelling that made the film special. What's interesting in the broader DreamWorks timeline is where Home lands historically. Released in 2015, it came at a time when DreamWorks was juggling a lot, trying to balance its bigger tentpole franchises like Kung Fu Panda while experimenting with standalone projects. Home felt like a gamble in some ways. It had a big star-powered voice cast, a soundtrack anchored by Rihanna, and a more intimate, emotionally led story. It wasn't a fairy tale parody. It wasn't about dragons or talking zoo animals. It was smaller and weirder. And that was a risk. In a way, Home represents DreamWorks stretching its boundaries, not abandoning its humor or visual flair, but shifting tone to try something gentler and more character-focused. From a representation standpoint, Home also holds a quiet but powerful place in animation history. It was one of the first major animated films from a big studio to center a young black girl as the lead. Tip isn't a sidekick. She isn't comic relief. She's the heart of the story. Her identity isn't tokenized or turned into a lesson. It's simply there, as natural as her relationship with her mom or her bond with O. That choice resonated, especially with families and kids who rarely saw someone who looked like Tip headlining a film. It didn't just add diversity. It added depth. And it marked a turning point in how animated stories could be told, by widening the lens of who gets to lead them. So while Home doesn't sit atop a vast cinematic empire or tie into a grand historical moment, it does carry cultural weight. It exists as a standalone story that offered something different at a time when animation was often playing it safe. It built its own mini-universe, influenced representation in family films, and created characters that were emotionally accessible and weirdly lovable. Instead of chasing legacy, it quietly made one. No sprawling franchise needed. Home, 2015, wasn't just a quirky intergalactic road trip with a flying slushy car. It was also a high-stakes financial swing for DreamWorks Animation. With a reported production budget of around $135 million, it was by no means a small project. That kind of budget puts it in the same league as many of DreamWorks' other major titles, signaling that the studio wasn't treating this like a side project. They went all in, high-end animation, a top-tier cast including Rihanna, Jim Parsons, Steve Martin, and Jennifer Lopez, plus an original soundtrack partially composed and performed by Rihanna herself. The film was built to dazzle in every sense, visually, musically, emotionally, and all of that costs serious money. Now, on the screen, you can absolutely see where the budget went. The production quality is slick, vibrant, and clean. From the color-shifting Boov to the intricate animation of floating cities and bubble tech, everything pops with that signature DreamWorks polish. The slushiest flying through a neon-lit night sky? Gorgeous. The Boov's bubble-wrapped version of Earth? Imaginative and absurd in the best way. The expressive facial animation, especially on O, who has to carry so much emotional range in such a simplified design, is a real technical win. This wasn't a low-budget experiment. It was a visually bold film that held its own against other major studio offerings at the time. At the box office, Home had a surprisingly strong opening, debuting at #1 in North America and eventually pulling in over $386 million globally. That's nearly triple its production budget, which from a numbers standpoint should qualify it as a financial success. However, in the world of big studio animation, it's never just about the production budget. Marketing costs for a movie like this are typically huge: TV spots, merchandise tie-ins, a soundtrack album, international promotional tours. And DreamWorks, already under pressure from a few underperformers before this, really needed Home to be more than just a modest win. It needed to be a tentpole. And while the film made decent money, it didn't explode into the stratosphere like Shrek, Madagascar, or How to Train Your Dragon had. The reception from audiences played a major role in where it ultimately landed. Kids loved it, instantly hooked on O's weird speech patterns and the physical comedy. Families showed up in big numbers, drawn by the color, the music, and the family-first storyline. But critics were more divided. Some praised its heart and originality, while others found it too lightweight or safe compared to more layered animated features. That critical lukewarmness likely softened the momentum for award season buzz or long-term franchise investment. The marketing leaned heavily on Rihanna's star power, her music, her voice, her fanbase, and that helped draw attention, especially from older audiences who might not have otherwise checked out an animated alien comedy. The soundtrack played a big part in creating a sense of coolness around the film, and it did give the movie a stronger cross-generational appeal. But it also created a weird tonal expectation. Some viewers expected a pop-fueled comedy, others were hit with a surprisingly emotional story about loss and loneliness. That mix helped the film linger emotionally, but it may have made it a bit harder to pin down for marketing. In the bigger picture of DreamWorks' financial timeline, Home was both a relief and a reset. It didn't tank. It didn't break records. It was a solid performer that earned its keep, helped stabilize the studio after a few rough patches, and quietly became a comfort movie for many. It didn't generate the kind of breakout financial boom that demands sequels, but it did generate just enough cultural goodwill to live on through merchandise, a Netflix series, and a pretty loyal fanbase. Financially, it was a film that did what it needed to do. Maybe not more, maybe not less, but with just enough sparkle to earn its place in DreamWorks' lineup. Looking to watch Home 2015? Here's where you can catch it, and for the best experience. Currently, the easiest and most convenient way is via Netflix. It's available in both the ad-supported and ad-free tiers, perfect for streaming in HD, and you can even download it for offline viewing. Netflix One. It's included until at least September 1st, 2025, so it's ready for multiple replays or family movie nights. Prefer owning your digital copy, or don't have Netflix? You can also rent or buy the film in HD from Kindle/Prime Video, Apple TV, Google Play, Microsoft Store, Fandango at Home, and several other digital platforms. Rents typically cost around $3.99, while purchasing lands near $14.99. Just watch. 2. For the fullest impact, here's the ideal setup. Watch it on Netflix if available. That HD stream ensures everything from the radiant neon colors of Boov tech to the emotional subtleties in O and Tip is vivid and immersive. Download it if you're planning to watch away from internet access. If you're opting to rent or buy, choose HD quality on platforms like Apple TV or Prime Video. Renting is great for a one-time emotional journey, while buying means you can revisit the story anytime and rewatch your favorite scenes. Avoid low-res or heavily compressed streams. This movie's charm lies in its crisp visuals, color palette, and immersive sound design, especially Rihanna's music, which truly shine in HD. So, whether you're streaming under a Netflix subscription or renting for a weekend watch party, choose HD for the full home experience. Dazzling animations, heartfelt moments, and an emotional ride best seen without tech compromise. 1. https://www Netflix.com/title/70305922 $UTM_source =ChatGPT.com watch home Netflix. 2. https://www justwatch.com/us/movie/home-2015 $UTM_source =ChatGPT.com home streaming. Where to watch movie online. Just Watch.